I'm Damien Fowler.
And I'm Eileen Sliffring.
And welcome to this edition of The Current Podcast.
This week, we're delighted to talk with Lizzie Collins, the SVP of Ad Innovation and B2B Marketing at SiriusXM Media, the advertising arm of SiriusXM, which includes Pandora, the SiriusXM streaming network, as well as the podcast network.
There are likely very few people who know more about audio ad innovation than Lizzie, who was actually the very first salesperson at Pandora back in 2006.
As a leader at SiriusXM Media, her focus is growing the largest digital audio ecosystem in North America.
So without further ado, we'll start by asking Lizzie about what advertisers need to know about the audio ad opportunity in 2024.
So Lizzie, tell us, what is it that advertisers need to know about the opportunity to reach people on audio channels?
Yeah, and thanks for having me. I love what you said about, I know everything about audio, but it's been quite a ride from 2006 until now. And I'd say that in this current moment in time, audio has such an important place in the consumer's life. 31, 32, whichever number you want to get hooked to, % of time spent with media is the audio format. And yet marketers are only allocating somewhere between 8, 9, under 10% of their media investment to this format. So first and foremost, I want advertisers to know just the power of audio. It is an opportunity to reach customers in places where you can't reach them via display or video. It has the power to turn on their brain in a unique way because you have the theater of the mind that has to fill in the pictures and the faces. And so cognitively, it's just such a powerful way to message. And so when you match the power of the format with, oh my gosh, there's all this incremental time that I'm not messaging to them, we just think there's a real opportunity in audio in general.
So looking at podcasting, at least, podcasting is one of the fastest growing digital channels. How have you been able to grow programmatic at SiriusXM and Pandora?
Well, podcasting, I think we all love. We're here on a podcast, so this is very meta, talking about podcasting on a podcast. So I love that. I want to point that out for the listeners. Podcasting is not necessarily new, but the ability for advertisers to buy it at scale with maybe an audience-based buying strategy with all of the tracking and targeting that they're used to in digital is what we've really foundationally been putting in place for the last 2 years. So what many don't know is that SiriusXM Media, Pandora, SoundCloud, and all of our other partnerships operate on the AdsWizz platform, and we are an audio-first technology company. We built all of our own audio ad delivery, ad serving, tracking, and whatnot. The opportunity to modernize the podcast space is what's really been the key factor for us to drive revenue in that space. And then specific to programmatic, without those pipes, right? Without that ability to do dynamic ad insertion, to target audiences, to onboard data, and then digitally deliver those ads, you were going to have buyers doing what they were doing historically, one show at a time. I can't tell you the horror stories of going into the clients and saying, here's our spreadsheet where we're tracking the podcasts we think we should be buying based on Joe Podcast Guy in the corner who just happens to know the most about podcasts. So the first step was putting that foundational ad tech in place. And the second step has been taking all of what advertisers appreciate in terms of programmatic transaction and bringing it to podcasting. And that's where IAB and others are referencing this significant growth, because it's this bringing the best of two worlds together into this medium.
What would you say are the advantages to programmatic ad buying on audio networks? How is it audience first?
Well, I think overall, you're seeing a big trend in advertisers, brands, even within the client, agencies, publishers, wanting to reduce friction on the buy side and the transaction as a whole. So programmatic obviously has been that promise for, over a decade now, right? To create just an effortless buying transaction. And so when we think about audio more specifically and audience-based buying, we have to be able to connect all of those pipes and be able to not be this hard to buy product. And so I spoke to that in my last example. That's been so much of the work we've done the last 2 years. And then because of all of that, we're a little different than some other audio partners. We're open ecosystem. So we will work with any third-party measurement vendor, transaction partners like the Trade Desk, targeting partners like ComScore, and advertisers obviously have their own data and their own ways in which they want to measure. And so that's also been, a huge breakthrough for us in terms of allowing, you said audience-based buying. I mean, just allowing our clients to address their customers in this format in the most effortless way possible.
One of the things that's interesting about audio is how it's different from TV, which has traditionally been a big brand building medium. Of course, that's changing too because of CTV, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts on how Pandora thinks about its ad offerings in terms of the balance between big brand campaigns and performance.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think what's hidden in this question is creative in general and trying to help brands understand the power of what audio creative can do. It can effortlessly travel cross-device, right? It can reach customers where they're not seeing a video ad or they're not seeing a display ad. It can get right literally into their ears. And I talked about the power of that. And so I would say, do talk to our customers about different products drive different results. Of course, you might want mass reach and super efficient for some effort that you're trying to push, maybe top of funnel, or you need something super geo-targeted. You want to move specific product off a store shelf. Yeah, that can impact targeting and that can impact some of what we sell you based on price. But we spend a lot more time through our in-house agency, Studio Resonate, helping to educate our customers on the right way to bring the video message into the audio format if they're a video first creative agency. And that starts with an audio brief. You'd be surprised how many agencies do a creative brief and it doesn't include audio as a way to interpret the brand or determine the call to action. And so once we get going in that direction, then we can take all aspects of their KPIs and build custom creative to meet the needs of, whatever they're trying to get the consumer to do.
I love that. Can I ask a follow-up question about that? What would you say are some of the salient points about building a good audio brief?
Well, first and foremost, understanding the customer and letting us really help you determine contextually where they're showing up. So women, for example, our podcast network is the largest podcast network for women in the United States. We beat everyone else. And it's that type of insight. And then the creators that are within our podcast network to say, look, Ashley Flowers is here. She's a massive star in the podcast world. She really has a tempo to her shows. It's true crime. These listeners are so leaned in that you don't need a music bed. You don't need to scream at the listener in that example, which might be more of a sort of traditional upbeat 15-second audio spot that might live in a music station. And so a lot of it is trying to understand the customer, then what is the context in which we're targeting? And then, of course, we have a million best practices about testing creative, and we use a lot of third parties to come in and actually pre-test creative. Of course, we have all of our own technology, which I mentioned, so we'll A/B test creative. And again, what I love about audio is that it's pretty effortless to build an audio ad. I mean, you can go from brief to a spec spot, 30 minutes, or less if we're talking about AI-produced creative, which we can talk about too. And so to be able to have all that optionality for an agency to play with actually helps inform a lot of landing the brief. And then, of course, we have something to live with throughout a campaign to reach back to.
So it's getting a lot more nuanced now. You mentioned creativity, and that's very interesting.
It's getting more nuanced because, look, you said I was the first salesperson at Pandora, and I was, and we were only ever inserting a 15 or a 30-second spot in between your favorite song. Now we're talking about spoken word content, podcast. It could be sports. It could be country music. You're talking about, and then in car, at home, mobile. So the good news is all of that signal capture we do on our end so that we can understand where ultimately this ad's running. And then that informs how many creative options you need. But it's not like video where that would take months to do, right? This is copy to ad is quick.
Yeah.
When it comes to being more nuanced, looking at podcasts, for instance, there's so many different types of podcasts, like true crime you brought up. I like those ones as well, like Crime Junkie, for instance. What kind of audiences are they attracting, and what does that mean for advertisers?
So the SiriusXM podcast network is over 2,500 shows. So you're talking about we have the most shows in the top 50, but we also have great shows, middle and long tail. And so it's as diverse as everybody's tastes. I mean, everything from Vibe Check, which is 3 African-American, gay, really outspoken guys that do the latest on news interpreted from their eyes and their ears, all the way into Crime Junkie, all the way into sports. We have shows about car racing, right? So that's what's so special about podcasting. But what's unique about SiriusXM and our specific network is that you don't have to come in and buy one show at a time. You can come in and say, I want women over-indexed in true crime, so that's going to be a nice part of your buy. And that's something unique to what we offer.
Surprising to me, women, true crime, for some reason.
I know. You know what? I think it's because so many women want to escape their day for a moment. All of our beloved housewives at home, like commuting kids around, and it's very cerebral. What's really cool about true crime that I don't think a lot of people understand if you don't listen is it's problem solving. It's like really detailed, trying to get to the bottom of what happened with a story. And I think it turns the brain on in a way that is invigorating.
Yeah. On that note, is true crime like one of the most popular, or what are some of those popular genres?
Oh, there's so many. Comedy is very popular. Team Coco with Conan O'Brien is within our network. Smartless is a really popular sort of mixed in with almost pop culture and comedy. Sports is growing fast, and specifically women's sports, which is great. And what I think is fun about that is there's so much story to tell behind the scenes in sports. And I think podcasts can do that in a way that linear TV can't. News, true crime, like we mentioned. And yeah, those would be like my tops.
Very cool. Why do you think women's sports is growing so
I just
quickly?
think there's so much of a story to tell about a lot of the women athletes, and it's all over the news, right? What's happening in women's basketball. Women's soccer is now a professional sport where you can make a career at it. I think there's just so much growth in terms of audiences leaning in, and there's a bunch of commercial opportunity there. And so women want to tell their story.
Yeah.
And you can do that in podcasting in a way you cannot do in other media types. That's why we're here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now, according to your research with Edison, 66% of Gen Z podcast listeners say they listen to or watch podcasts to stay up to date with the latest topics, but only 17% say they trust the info they read on social media. Are podcast hosts the new, more trusted social media influencers?
I mean, yes. Short answer is yes, but I don't think it's just podcasts. I think any influencer out there that is very invested in their craft and their trade and having a commercial opportunity and being an influencer understands the power of how podcasting and audio more specifically helps them reach their audience. So Ashley Flowers is a great example. She's on social all the time, whether she's talking about fashion or her famous lip color or what shows are coming up next, different cases that she's researching. And so you'll often see her listeners kind of go back and forth on social, and that ultimately informs her show. And so this ecosystem connection is what these influencers are after. And I think the power of the podcast format is they can just tell deeper stories and therefore tell deeper, why to buys for the products that are integrated. So some are probably more comfortable than others, but the audio influencer, and the other thing to add is just like they're connected to their audience in a way off social media and into the podcast where they can just use more words. They can just describe something beyond the snippet-based format that is social for all of us.
And why is that effective for advertisers? Why is that helpful?
I just think they can riff. It's out again outside of the 15 or 30 second window. They can riff about why they like the product. They can go deeper into the benefits of it or what is cool about it to them. So personal endorsement. I mean, that's what they're able to do in that space. And it's a super powerful way for advertisers to drive their KPIs.
When it comes to that omnichannel experience, and you mentioned that you're part of this open network, it's good for advertisers to be able to reach their audience on the podcast. But beyond that, it can obviously drive an omnichannel campaign?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. We were so curious about what is the true incrementality of a podcast listener. And so for the last year, we've been analyzing campaigns. We actually analyzed over 2,000 campaigns to determine when we add podcasting to a streaming plan, how much more incremental reach. And it depends on the campaign, but the mean was 32%.
Wow.
Incremental audience was captured in the podcasting line, essentially being added to the order. And so without that, those customers would have never been messaged. And I think that's just a really good example of the power of what SiriusXM Media brings to bear. Even in the audio space, we have such a multi-channel opportunity for our marketers.
So I saw an interview with you last year talking about how advertisers can use AI to save costs. And that's seems like a very common refrain in the industry right now because things have moved very fast on the AI front. How are you thinking about AI in 2024, this year?
Yeah. There's a lot around AI, a lot of buzz, and how does it ultimately land for each of us to make our lives easier or to augment what we're already doing. And one of the things that we see with smaller brands and smaller buys is that sometimes they feel like there's a barrier of entry if they don't have audio creative. And so we've done a lot of testing to leverage AI to be able to self-service the creative process. And so that's where we're leveraging AI, which is just to take a company that might be a media agency that's of one person, right? That kind of like kitchen counter digital marketer that might have a couple clients. Maybe they have a couple car dealers, or maybe they have a couple doctor's offices. And so we have a really great product that they can use in our Audio Go, which is our self-serve buying tool to just come in and quickly make an audio ad. And they're off to the races. And so that's where we've tried to bring it forth, is just where can we make someone that might be stuck because they don't have the resources? How can we help them scale? And so AI helps us do that. I think there's also a future of where we'll see AI show up in how we're just crunching numbers for our clients and how we're processing data. It's just about speed and scale. It's not going to replace our creators. There's no AI Conan coming anytime soon.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Is there a particular sector of brand that have been more friendly towards audio ads or have approached audio more enthusiastically than others?
No, it's at this point, gosh, I'm 18 and a half years into this selling audio business. Mm-hmm. And I would say years ago, yes, it would be entertainment. Really understood the power of it. And maybe someone like CPG was like, if I don't show the girl shampooing her hair, how's anyone going to understand how this product works? Right. But we're so past that.
Yeah.
There's no one vertical. I think just overwhelmingly, it's just an underspent problem. And that audio and the consumer behavior in audio has outpaced the marketer's investment. So that's just most of what we spend time helping them to understand.
Do you still think, given the big opportunity that audio represents, there's a lot more education to be done for marketers? And what does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think most of that education is in and around measurement. So audio is everything we've talked about on the show, all the reasons it's powerful, but it doesn't throw off a click signal. And most of what marketers have lived with in the digital ecosystem for many years, decades, is last click attribution. Not to say that everyone's doing that now. Many of our customers are going to more of a mixed media model. And so it's just helping them to figure out, where do you put audio in your measurement plan? How do we work together to make sure you're understanding where you're delivering impressions against what customers, and how ultimately that's driving your KPIs. But it requires a conversation and education, because they're not inherently, if they're not buying it, they don't know how to measure it, and they could be undervaluing it or giving value to a different partner because they weren't capturing the right data signal.
Yeah.
How do you guys measure it?
So it depends on what they're looking for. Of course, there's many amazing third parties out there that we're integrated with to measure everything from store traffic to attitudinal intent. But again, back to the fact that we own all of our own ad tech, we sit on the right data in a very privacy safe place to be able to work with clean rooms or work with advertisers directly or partners to share impression level data or whatever is the right signal in order for them to recognize if that customer converted. So it's not rocket science. All of us that are in this space understand how it works. But because we sit on all of our own ad tech and we're open to working with anyone, we personalize it for whatever the customer wants.
And And that's it for this edition of The Current Podcast. We'll be back next week, so stay tuned.
The Current Podcast theme is by Love and Caliber. The Current team includes Kat Vesey and Sydney Cairns.
And remember,
I want advertisers to know just the power of audio, because you have the theater of the mind that has to fill in the pictures and the faces. And so cognitively, it's just such a powerful way to message.
I'm Damien.
And I'm Elise.
And we'll see you next time. And if you like what you hear, please subscribe and leave us a review. Also, tune into our other podcast, The Current Report.